Thank you guys very much. Thank you. So I wanted to give everybody a chance maybe to ask a few little questions to everybody. I'll get started here based on a little bit on a conversation we had at dinner about editors. So we had a little conversation last night about editors, and so I'm not sure how to do this in the best possible way. Maybe I should just say editors and hand over the microphone and just say go. So do you have a good editor story? Because we haven't talked about the editorial process quite so much. So I'm going to pass this over.
Well, working at a daily newspaper, I certainly do work with an editor, and I'm grateful for that. I don't know, often people say, are you censored? And I often hear creative people talk about, how frustrating it is to have things shot down, and I certainly have had cartoons shot down, and I've had my frustrations and my disagreements, and have had arguments, and sometimes I win them, sometimes I lose them, but I can't imagine doing what I do, working at a newspaper, even though I'm drawing political cartoons that have my opinion, they're still rooted in fact, and I consider myself, before even being an artist, I consider myself first and foremost a journalist. And sort of what Stan was referring to earlier about doing research, I can't just make something up. I can't just call a politician a name. And it's so vital to have an editor look over my work, and just to have another set of eyes, just to make sure that I am being accurate, or that I'm not going to be misperceived. Sometimes an editor will see something in my work that I hadn't seen, so I can avoid unnecessarily offending someone. I'm not going to pull any punches, but I don't want to, unnecessarily offend someone or be misunderstood. So I find it to be a vital part of the creative process. Having said that, my ideas are my own. No one gives me an idea, no one dictates to me. And so I have that freedom to come up with whatever I want, and then they can choose to run it or not. And 99% of the time it's fine, and then sometimes we get in the weeds and have disagreements, but it's all part of the creative process.
Yeah, earlier today I was asked, differences between creator-owned and work for hire, and really it goes deeper than that, because it's different from editor to editor to editor. Every editor you work with has a different style. Some are very hands-on and want to get really involved in a story. Some, I question if they've ever read a word I've written, that they just, go with whatever I send them without even looking at it. I think, and I've had some really great editors, some that I consider friends to this day, for a number of reasons. And the great editors are people who sit with me, and we talk stories out. They're almost a sounding board up front. I get to a comfort level with them, where I can, just discuss the story with them. They may offer some suggestions, and then we go. And I've had tougher editors that are, not necessarily what I would ever consider a great editor. I mean, it's the first editor I had at Marvel. I worked up, I had a little notebook, one of the, 200-page notebook, and I filled that notebook up with notes that editor had given me on a 30-page story. And it was, I'd write, I sent an outline in, and my outlines are very detailed, and the editor approved the outline. And I don't mind talking about him. He's no longer with Marvel, and I never work with him again anyway. So, I sent him my outline, and he took about 3 weeks, or he approved the outline, so then I wrote the script. He took about 3 weeks to get back to me on the script, and he said, "Hey, Cullen, this script is really great, it's awesome. I have a few notes, and basically after page 12, 30-page comic, I need you to rewrite everything." So that was his few notes. So I did that, I took all his notes, and I rewrote it. He took another 2 weeks. He called me and said, yeah, and he wanted me to rewrite not only the next, he wanted me to write everything from page 1 to page 30. And he would give me notes and say, you wrote a scene here, and yeah, you've got a page here, and what I really like, all right, so listen, I want you to do a scene like the guy wakes up, he looks over, he sees his wife sleeping next to him, he goes downstairs, he sees an axe in the wood block. He gets the axe. He goes back upstairs. He kills his wife with the axe. Then he wakes up and it's a nightmare. And he realizes his wife's dead for real. These aren't marching orders, man, but that's what I want you to do. And I was like, you want me to do that in one page? Stan thumbnailed that in one page. And that was a real tough editor, and I thought, if that's the way it was going to be, I would never work with Marvel again, for instance. But that's not always the case. Some editors you get, you're really great. One of the things we talk about Marvel and DC, a lot of people say, do you come to them, like when I write a lot of these Deadpool series, and people say, well, do you come to Marvel and say, this is the Deadpool story I want to write? More often than not, with Marvel or DC, they come to you and say, what would you do with a book called Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe? And that's an editor that comes to me and says, this is the title we're going to write. And then I pitch the story, what I would do with that title. Or they say, we want you to do a story with Captain America, what would you do? Sometimes very loose, sometimes very detailed. The best editors, though, are sounding boards. They keep the ships, they keep all the trains running, and they keep everything going in a timely fashion so that the book's never late. And honestly, for me, the best editors go to bat for me with the publisher in a lot of ways. And those are the editors that I enjoy working with, and then there's those other guys.
This is being recorded. Editors are great. I think the best editors I've encountered are the ones that do the majority of the work before they hire me. They've made a lot of the creative decisions about whether or not I'm worth hiring or whether they trust me to tell the story I want to tell before they hire me, and then sort of make my job easier when it comes to actually telling that story. One of the great things about editorial relationships, a lot like other collaborative relationships in comics, is they're sort of self-correcting. If you're with an editor and it's not a good match, they stop hiring you. So you don't really have to deal with them too long. So like everything else in comics, it's collaboration. It's about relationships. But like I said, I haven't run into too many bad ones. Most have been really great.
Mostly I've done inking, so I didn't get a lot of editorial guidance, which is kind of nice. But I did have a couple really good suggestions from editors, and one really bad one that's kind of a funny story, so I'll probably tell that. But the two good ones where I was working, the first book I worked on was a book called Twilight Avenger, and I think on the second book I worked on, I kind of got into some mood. I'm very fresh, I'm just starting out, so I kind of wanted to be like EC, like the old EC books, and sometimes these guys would do like a lot of weird things, like they do one panel would be in duo shapeboard, one would be zipatone, one would be wash. I thought, well, that'd be really cool, I could experiment with all this media and put it all together. And I got the note, and the penciler at the time, I kind of kept in contact with them, we became friends. He said, oh yeah, that'd be really cool, let's do that. So the editor looked at it and said, Bruce, why are you using 10,000 different media on this? You're ruining the flow of the story, and I thought, no, it's really cool. And says, well, next issue, why don't we keep it to one? Choose wash, choose zipatone, choose one. And later on, I thought that was a really good suggestion because, again, we're always talking about how important it is to do story. And if you're doing anything that interrupts the flow of the story, you fail. So that was a good note. I wouldn't say the second one's a really good note, but the only other time I remember having a lot of editorial input was I was working on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And one job, the penciler was, they brought him in for a fill-in issue, and he just was not getting the likenesses the way they wanted him, so I had to go in and change every face. So most of the notes were, change this guy, change this. And it was weird because I changed some, and then they would keep some of his, some of mine, and then some were like, who knows? But they all had to go through the actors, as I recall. I don't know if it was all of them, but I think most of the actors had final say-so on these. But the funny story, sort of, was I was working for Malibu a lot in the 90s, and they had a sudden growth spurt. I think they were hiring a lot of people very fast. And they hired a young woman to be an assistant editor, and she became a full editor. And she's a really nice person. We got along. I started to work from going to the conventions, and we got along great. But one day I get a letter in the mail, snail mail, and it was long typed out letters, saying different things I should work on. And said, now one thing I'm really disturbed about is I'm comparing your inks with so-and-so's pencils, and I'm noticing that he's put X's in a lot of places, and you're not inking any of those X's. And so I had to think about this for a second, and I call her on the phone, I say, now, you do realize the penciler's putting all those X's because that means that's where he wants solid black. I mean, it's a lot easier to just put X rather than fill it all in with pencil. He goes, no, I don't think so. I think he wants those all X's. And I said, well, maybe we should get on a conference call with the artist and see if that's really the case. So he gets the artist on the phone, and I say, oh, Dean, so anyway, we're on this conversation because the editor sort of wants to know if you want those X's you put into the pencils, you want those inked as X's, or would you like them black? No, black! You're not making them X's, are you? She said, all right, never mind. But that's about the extent of my editorial. But later on, after I did more kind of like comic book work for advertising, I dealt with mostly art directors, which were kind of acting like editors. And the one reason I got out of doing commercial illustrations for the most part is much worse than comics. Sometimes it pays a lot better in the commercial art world than comics, but you can sometimes get, I would literally get notes that contradicted each other on the same page. There'd be 5 different people's input, and they would kind of like, more blue eyes, less blue eyes. And so, yeah, after a number of years doing that sort of thing, I thought, well, I think I'll just do something else.
Editors are like the gateway for me to get work, and so I mean, unless I know the writer or artist or inker, I rarely talk to anybody but the editor, and talk on email. If I ever get a phone call, I am scared, like something happened. Yeah, and like I don't even answer my phone. If it goes to voicemail, but there's no voicemail, then it's awesome. But if there's an actual voicemail, I'm like, oh man, who's that? Who's that voicemail? And so I barely ever talk to them except conventions, because like I said during the coloring panel, for all the time that other people in the chain, like artists and inkers, get extra time, and it takes away from my time as a colorist, that's where I score all my free meals and drinks at conventions. So editors both give me all my work and all my free top shelf scotch and food, and so they're kind of like my mecca, like what I go to, you know, like, yeah. And honestly, to be a good editor, they just need to be communicative, and if you send an email, respond, and if you send a book in and and it's done, and then not wait 2 weeks to send corrections back because it's due to the printer the next day. So those are the good editors. There's bad editors too, but I'm not gonna go into that.
Well, a good editor knows when to step in and when to leave you alone. And I've had good editors, and I respect their opinion. There was one story that I turned in that I wasn't quite sure about the ending, so I wrote that, read this as soon as you get it and get back to me. And fortunately, Diana was my editor at the time, so, oh yeah, this is great. I didn't expect this ending at all. Another time I sent in 2 endings, and I just told her, pick one. So she picked the one that she liked. But an editor also acts as a buffer between the creator and the publisher. They kind of protect the creators. If it's a good editor, they try to get more money for your project, more promotions, more ad budget, and that's what a good editor does. I've had great editors in the past.
Questions for you guys? Yeah, Tiana.
All right, we have another question first. Okay, so for all of you who are writers, artists, colorists, everything, what element of work gives you the most satisfaction?
What element of your work gives you the most satisfaction? Dave, can I start with you, Jeff? You want to? Okay, yeah, whoever wants to. Somebody got it.
Really, as much as I complain about, say, going to conventions and things like that, because or honestly events like this, because it takes time away from my work schedule, it's things like this that give me the most satisfaction. Interacting with people who read the work, interacting with people who want to break into comics. I mean, I really get a lot out of that. I enjoy it, and that's hands down. Close second is the collaboration, and there's sort of an instant gratification in comics that I don't get in prose. In comics, I write a script and I start seeing art in a few days or whatever, and I like that. but hands down, interacting with readers and aspiring creators and actual working creators is very, you know, it's inspiring for me.
Out of the 5 cartoons I draw each week, some are national, some are international, some are local, and it's most satisfying knowing that locally the mayor or the governor is reading one of my cartoons. And I don't set out to change the world, I just want to join in the conversation and maybe add a different viewpoint rather than the predictable viewpoint. But sometimes change does occur because of one of my cartoons, and that's very satisfying.
I'll give you a more nuts and bolts answer. The place, when I'm working, the thing that I feel most confident in and it gives me the most satisfaction when I'm done with it is thumbnailing a page. I love storytelling, and to me that's the essence of storytelling, is taking the story and breaking it down into its visual elements. The actual drawing of it, I start to feel weaker and weaker about my skills, but in the thumbnail stage, I feel very confident, and that's where I feel like I'm a Viking.
Yeah, I don't do it very often, but I'm trying to do more of my own work, and I kind of agree with Phil. It's fun to actually work out the story, work out either like dialogue or thumbnail, and just kind of get the story just on the page. And you feel like it's kind of done. That's kind of the sad part. It's like, okay, I'm done. That's it. It's on the page now. Like, no, now it's got to be penciled and inked and colored and lettered. And in terms, I like a lot of the aspects of comic creation in general. So I think what's most fun is like the very beginning, like when I just get started on something. The middle just work, and then the end I'm really excited. So it's kind of like a fun sandwich.
Sandwich is good too. I'm a really big nerd, and I just love comics. And if I got an opportunity to color JSA for a while, I was just like, that was awesome. And then I get to talk about it with people, and then talk about, I can have a 20-minute conversation with somebody about Nightcrawler and his origin story. It's just being part of the process and being part of the industry, and then just talking to my students or just other fans. I get a lot out of that. And especially since I sit at home in my little coloring cave all day for weeks at a time, watching copious amounts of Netflix and Hulu. So I really get a lot of it when I get to do things like this.
Yeah, actually, I agree. I mean, these things are wonderful, going to conventions, getting feedback from people, meeting other pros, because most of us, we work isolated. I work at home, my family's around me, but basically, they love my work. But no, coming to conventions and meeting people. Also, too, I love to share the craft. That's why I agreed to come here, because it's a teaching thing. I was a master's teacher or master's advisor for years, master's thesis advisor, because I love to share, love to encourage young people. I'm going to be at Crossroads Columbus, Comics Crossroads Columbus next month. It's put on by Jeff Smith and University of Columbus in Ohio, and half of it will be seminars, the other half a real comic book convention. But just to meet aspiring cartoonists and just to encourage them and just to share what I have and to share my craft, I really enjoy that. And meeting other professionals, because basically we love comics. That's why we're in this industry.
Questions from you guys? What would you say is the biggest change in the industry since you started working in it? What's been the biggest shift? And obviously we have different perspectives because you guys haven't all come into your specific industry at the same time. So what, if anything, would you say?
Well, the internet's huge. I mean, I've been in this business for decades, and the internet nowadays, it's easy to put yourself out there, but it's so hard to become known. I mean, there's just so much out there. It's easy for anyone to put things out there, but you're just lost in it. You have to find a way to rise above everyone else, and that takes something very unique individual and a unique talent.
I can make this really technical about printing or something like that, but I think the biggest thing that's really happened is like I think I went to my first San Diego Comic Con around 2001, 2002 as a professional, and then by the time I went to my last one 3 years ago, the people that came has changed a lot, and the fans and the social awareness that's now part of the storytelling in the industry. It's not, and that's to say that wasn't taking place, before. It's just, I think it's become much more something that's become important, where dealing with social issues and the topics of the day, and I think as a whole, like there's just so much more available, and then it's nice that San Diego's just full of like a bunch of sneaky geeks. So there's it's I don't know, just I really like how inclusive everything has gotten, and how much I guess it's gotten bigger, and it's kind of become this huge thing. But at the same time, it's I think comics are affecting a lot more people, and I think that's something I've definitely noticed.
Yeah, I started getting into comics, or wanting to get into comics, in the late 80s, and so it's a huge difference now. It's kind of like what Stan was saying. It's I thought it was hard back then, but it's I would think much harder now, because of just like what you were saying. There's so many people who have access to get to the publishers, to either work out in other ways, and then have to go through publishers even.
And it's not just in the U.S. You're competing globally.
Yeah, exactly. It's everywhere. And so in a way, I guess maybe in a lot of ways, especially in the late 80s, I think it was the black and white boom, and the independent market was really getting started. So the first time I got a job, there was an ad in something called the Comics Buyer's Guide, which was a weekly newspaper about comics, and that was about as close as you got to the internet, as far as knowing what was going on in the comics community. But there's been huge, just the changes digitally. I never dreamed that I would ever color a comic book when I started. That just was not in my wheelhouse. I would not have thought that was something possible, so that's been kind of a cool thing. Or lettering. I remember back in the 90s even, it didn't seem that long ago, but I remember talking to the editor of Malibu who said, well, the thing with lettering is, there's this whiz-bang font out, but it just doesn't look quite right, so I don't think that's ever going to really take hold. I think it's always going to be hand lettering. So of course, that's what happens. Technology just changes everything.
Comiccraft.com.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to talk to people on the phone. I don't anymore. Yeah, I've had a whole relationships with editors and other collaborators where I've never spoken to them. And it goes down to technology, changing the way we make comics, but also the way we distribute comics, and the way people don't have to pay for comics anymore. Those are all exciting things and also challenges for us.
Yeah, so besides the digital aspects, because that's the biggest thing, digital comics, the way comics are distributed. So on a reader level, though, I think one of the things I've noticed that I didn't notice, say, 10 years ago. 10 years ago, people were very obsessed with the continuity of stories, and they were very obsessed with how these, this issue is affected by the issues that came out 10 years ago or whatever. Nowadays, I think readers are starting to define their own continuities within comics. So there are, 4 Batman books, and I know that some readers will read one of those, and that's the only continuity they care about, and they'll define their own continuities based on that, rather than feeling like they have to read everything and follow every story to feel satisfied by it. So I think that's a change I've seen in readership in general, is this readers defining their own continuities.
For me, it's the shift in the way news is covered, and with the 24-hour news cycle. It used to be, when I started out drawing editorial cartoons, there would be a few big stories floating around about there, and even though I was on a daily deadline, I might have a few days to really ponder a particular issue and really form an idea. And now, it's not only what is in the news today, but what will still be hanging around tomorrow, because the news is changing hourly. So I almost feel like I have to, predict what will still be fresh tomorrow. So that's one thing. And with syndicated cartoons, and syndicated cartoons go out elsewhere. A number of years ago, the syndicated cartoons would go out by mail and would arrive at the newspaper a few days later, and then be in print a few days later, and still be timely. And now, of course, same thing. If they don't get there immediately digitally, then those cartoons don't seem very fresh at all. And then the other thing is the lack of critical thinking and the divisiveness on the part of some readers and who just don't understand satire and are so overly sensitive about everything. So that's the one thing I've definitely noticed.
This kind of goes back to editing. I was wondering if you have ever set your page rates in keeping in mind the possible number of edits that have to make it. Once you already done something, then you have to go back and review something that starts to eat into time that you need to spend doing other things.
Yeah, called combat pay. Got that.
That would
apply to you.
That would be awesome, but no, that's never happened for me. Because then I'd be defining among editorial, like, oh, I know this guy's gonna ask for a lot of edits, so my page rate for you is higher. But really, like with Marvel or DC, at least the way it's always worked for me is I send them, they ask me for a list of my credits, and they set a page rate. They come to me and say, this is your page rate across the board. And they don't set it like this, and it's not like a lot of freelance work where that includes two or that includes one rewrite or anything. That's just your page rate. So every rewrite is just eating away at that. And I've never, I mean, I have an agent now who negotiates my page rates for me, and that's been more successful than I've ever been in the past. But usually, I really wish that I could do that. I wish that's the way it worked, but it doesn't.
There are a few exceptions. Sometimes if you take something and it's like just a brutal deadline, like an impossible deadline, you might get rate and a half or something if it's if it's combat pay. But to work backwards from what you're saying, there are companies that I will work for at below my page rate because I know I will never see a rewrite from them. Dynamite is that company. Dynamite pays me about half my normal rate. But it's worth it to me because I have never had to rewrite a word for them. Never. So that's about the only way it works for me anyway.
Yeah, that's never come up. Like when I was doing inking mostly, I don't remember having any circumstance where I had to go back and change anything except the Deep Space Nine story I told you about. What's interesting when you kind of compare comics with the commercial art world, it becomes a lot more complicated at times, because you'll kind of agree on a fee, and then you'll also kind of agree on an approval process. So once they approve the pencils, that's one thing, with the inks, and once there's like a final approval, anything after that, if they ask for more changes, that ends up into being like a per hour situation where you actually charge them. So that's kind of nice, and you can actually make more money, and like I said, in this field, but it's also really, really enervating and nerve-wracking. So I don't do this as much as possible. What I kind of like about what I'm doing now is I do a lot of these, I do cover recreations, and we agree on a price. I tell them what the price is, and there's no changes. And again, it's kind of the same thing. If there are changes, then it's extra money.
I should say that as an artist, I was thinking as a writer, but as an artist, if I'm asked to redraw something, usually I get paid for that. Usually you get your rate again for redrawing things.
But the combat pay is kind of what I was saying, where like if I usually for my page rate, I for like a 20-page book, I usually may have 8 pages that need some sort of correction, unless I just totally have a mind blank and I don't know, I color Batgirl's inside cape a blue instead of yellow, and then I got to go do and change that on everything, or the Huntress's skin color like slightly off or something. Then I have to do like a page-wide thing, or a book-wide thing. But generally, it's like I do 1 round of corrections and I'm done. And in extreme cases, it'll be 3 rounds, but it'll just be like some minor little tweak. It's usually the editor that I don't really try not to work for again. But if something happens where like I had a script that said I was doing a retelling the Joker origin story in Batman Confidential, and the script said that he falls in a tank of red stuff, and then my editor, who was Mike Harlan, was like, no, that should be green. So I'm like, all right. So I had to go back and just change like 12 pages of like heavily red, oriented color scheme that I based the entire rest of the book on that all being red. So I'm like, oh, that'll contrast really well with green. So suddenly it's not just 12 pages I had to change everything. And then that one, he gave me combat pay.
Well, mine is creator-owned books, so there's no. I mean, I own it, so I just send in the finished work. However, changes that have been made are because of me. I mean, I wanted a change, such as I had mentioned a tea ceremony story, and in it, Usagi originally carried his swords into the tea house, but then doing a little more research after I turned in the pages, I found that you don't take the swords in there, so I contacted my editor, say, don't send it to the press as yet, I need to do another page, I need to do a replacement page, and I did.
Should have gave yourself combat there.
I think I blame the writer for that.
Oh, good.
One thing I wanted to ask about was, we talked a little bit about fans, and changes. One of the changes I think is the immediacy of the response and feedback that you get. You know, it used to be you would have a comic, and you gotta wait for letters to come in from readers or things like that. Now it's so much, and even for the newspaper, you know, and now it's, you know, it's immediate. As soon as that hits, there's already some out. With comics, sometimes you have people who are getting it the night before, because the comic shop gets it, even though people aren't supposed to look at it, they get it. We talked about that a little bit, but do you go immediately out? Like when the paper hits and you know that comic's out, are you already looking to see what people are thinking or saying about it, or you try to avoid it, or let it settle a little bit?
I mean, I'll post it on Facebook, and certainly I'll get email. I mean, sometimes the cartoons that I think are going to be really controversial, it's crickets, and I hear nothing. And then it's the ones that I don't sometimes expect for people to be upset, and like people will react positively or negatively. So sometimes I can't predict it. What I don't like is I'll post on Facebook, and then there will be this whole thread of, you know, arguing, and it'll go off in some weird tangent, and I'm sure we've probably all experienced that. So I'm not really, like, honestly, once I finish my cartoon and it's scanned and in the system, I try to forget about it, and I try to just like clear my head and think about anything other than the news for a little bit. And so, yeah.
Well, you've got to move to the next daily cycle. So if you're holding on to yesterday's, it's tough to move on to tomorrow.
Exactly, it's what have you done for me today? So, and yeah, and I, you know, I also play music, and I'm in a band and I write music, and it's such a joy to be able to play a song that I wrote 12 years ago and maybe change it up and play it a little bit differently, but I can't do that with cartoons. I can't do cover versions of other cartoons, and I can't say, wow, that cartoon I did 3 years ago, I could do way better right now, and I wish I could just like redraw it, you know, but I can't.
Yeah, I'm like Beetlejuice. If you say my name on Twitter, I'm gonna be there. Just once for me. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's important to know your character flaws, and I have many, but one of them is I can't help but look. I have to see what people are saying on Wednesday. Well, there's a retailer who the night before always posts his thoughts on comics, and I'm always like, I got to see what this guy's gonna say. You know, I want to know, and good or bad. And it really, Wednesdays are my least productive day, because when a new book comes out, that's why I was mentioned I use a cooking timer to keep me focused. I have to do that on Wednesdays, otherwise I'll write a sentence. I say, that was a great sentence. What's Twitter say? And sometimes if I'm getting bad reaction, it'll derail me in a big way. It'll really mess me up.
Yeah, I think being a comic book creator is sort of the perfect station for me, because we're not famous enough to really catch a lot of flack. You know, we catch a little, and it's enough for me to deal with just by, you know, being a little bit famous is just right for me, so I can brush it off.
And I think some people talk about being comic books. If I go to a comic shop, people
Yeah.
know who I am. If I go to the grocery store,
Yeah, I go to the hardware store and be fine. Yeah, until they ban me at some point.
Yeah, luckily, I haven't seen a lot of good or bad comments on my own work in comics. I think the last thing I did was inking Phil on Godzilla, and I kind of looked around, and it's like it's kind of nice if I can see nothing. So I think the only thing I even saw for Godzilla was something, admirable job by Phil Hester and Bruce McCord. I'll take admirable.
That's fine. Cherish it.
Twitter all the Instagram, social media stuff is actually an awesome tool. Being a creator and be able to like promote yourself. And I love because the writers right now on this background book I'm on, they tweet anything, any hint of a whisper about the book in the reviews, and that's awesome because I just retweet. But every once in a while I can't sleep at night, and I'll just Google myself like Alan Paslakwa, colorist or review, and then I'm like, oh, why did I do that? It's just a bad sleep after that. Yeah. So.
I always say I never like to watch. I wake up early on Saturday morning. Saturday morning at 4 a.m. watching TV. It is you're fat. You need to exercise. You need to get a diet. It's everything. You are a bad physical specimen, and you need to change everything. It's not a good time to watch. If you're up at 4, you probably are. Right. That's why I'm up at 4. It's things like that.
Well, I don't look for reviews. However, I have a pretty solid fan base, and they'll collect all their reviews on their Facebook page, Usagi Ojimbo Dojo. And so I just go there, and for the most part, I'll just link onto them onto my Facebook page. My favorite, there was one reviewer when I did a book called Senso, a miniseries about the Martians invading feudal Japan. This is kind of like my take on H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. One of the reviewers said, why does he even do this? I mean, we know how it's all going to end. It always ends with the bacteria killing off the Martians, but my ending was completely different, and I was just waiting for that reviewer to eat his words, but he never did. They never do.
I'm right. I mean, the first issue did. I think there's a lot of people we talk about, people who react, who haven't actually read it, but they react to the reactions that people have about it. We're going to go ahead and give a little time if people want to get autographs from our creators tonight, people who may not be able to make it back tomorrow. We'll also, tomorrow from noon to 2, we'll have a chance for people to bring in work and get autographs or autograph programs. So if you want to get a program autograph tonight, that would be great. Let's give a big round of applause for all of our